This is the 10-minute Bible study on Thursday night. We were going to have a book club tonight, but out of an abundance of caution, prioritizing Sunday events rather than midweek events because of the new Omicron variant of COVID going around and having people nervous and stuff like that. We're not doing that tonight. We're doing the regular Bible study at 7 p.m. So if you'd like to, you can join us on Zoom. I'll put the credentials at the end of this. At the end of this, I'll put them in the descriptions, both on YouTube and on Facebook. And that'll start at 7. But we have a super interesting passage of scripture to look at tonight, and so I want to jump right into it. It raises all kinds of really interesting questions about taxation, about how much Christians should honor institutions that maybe we don't even appreciate or participate in. It has to do with, even just how much we feel obligated to fit in to the culture around us. So here's what happens. This is after a healing, and then after Jesus predicts his death. So, excuse me. So there's this sort of theme of the disciples not really understanding what's going on, but this is about to get real. Matthew chapter 17, verse 24 reads like this. It says, after Jesus and his disciples arrived in Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma temple tax came to Peter and asked, doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax? Now, what you have to understand is that the temple tax was not imposed by the Romans. This was a tax imposed by the Jews themselves, by the religious authorities, imposed upon the Jewish, worshipers in order to upkeep the temple, keep the priests happy and all that kind of stuff. Different groups of Jews, regardless of, even not even including the Christian groups, some were supportive of it and some weren't. I think what I read is that the Pharisees were generally supportive of it, like they, paid their temple tax, but an awful lot of people tried to get out of it, right? And so this, and this is a relevant question for Jesus followers. When Matthew's writing and telling this story, it's a Christian group, but it's still kind of a minority within Judaism. They may not be completely split. Certainly at the time that the story is taking place, when Jesus is walking around with his disciples, they're a sect within Judaism. They are definitely not a new religion, but they're a sect that's seeing things differently, that's acting differently. And so there's this question about how do they owe anything to the temple? Should they participate in the upkeep of the temple when they're kind of leading a reform movement, right? There may be Christians today that are wondering the same thing, like, should I even tithe to a traditional church when I'm really all about home churches, or, I'm into a parachurch, so why should I support the more traditional Christian institutions, stuff like that? And I've heard all those questions asked. I can give money directly to the poor. I don't have to support a church building, that costs all kinds of money. So, so these guys come around to collect the tax, and they ask Peter, doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax? Yes, he does, Peter replied. And then when Peter came into the house, Jesus was the first to speak. What do you think, Simon? So it's like Jesus knows the conversation that's happened. What do you think, Simon? He asked. From whom do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes? From their own children or from others? Fascinating question. Peter says from others, right? So they don't take them from their children, they can take them from others. And, it sort of raises this question like, okay, so who's collecting the taxes? Who's it benefiting? Who are children and who are, a commentator I read used the word vassals, like you collect taxes from your vassals, but not from your children. Are we vassals of God? Are we children of God? Are we vassals of the church, or are we children, of the church? And then Jesus continues, well, then the children are exempt, Jesus said to him. But so that we may not cause offense, go to the lake, throw out your line, take the first fish you catch, open its mouth, and you will find a 4 drachma coin. Take it and give it to them to pay for my tax and yours. And so it's as though Jesus is saying, we don't owe the institution anything. We are children of God. We are not vassals, right? We are not the others that the taxes would be collected from. We are children of God, children of the church, not, servants of the church in that sense. But I want to be a team player is kind of what Jesus is saying. We don't want to cause offense. We don't want to cause unnecessary disunity. So we're going to do our part. We're going to pay our part. And it's just a fascinating thing to think about. And I think, clearly this applied particularly at the time to the relationship between Jesus, his followers, and the institution of Judaism. And I've already made comparisons. I think it can apply today to church institutions. If institutions have failed us, should we still support them? And I think Jesus' answer is kind of like, well, you're not under obligation because you're a child of God. The institution isn't you have direct access to God. You're God's child. The institution isn't a necessary go-between. But at the same time, his answer is kind of like, but why create a problem? Why not participate as a good citizen? I think to me, this applies on a national level too. Like, there are a lot of questions these days about the Christian's relationship to government and how we should function. And when Republicans are in power, they cite Romans 13, be subject to the ruling authorities. God put them in charge. And the Democrats argue that Romans 13 doesn't mean what you think it means. And then when the Democrats are in power, you just reverse things. And Democrats are all citing Romans 13, which I find really ironic all of a sudden, because I think we debunked that understanding of Romans a few years ago. But I think that there's more nuance to the conversation. And I think that kind of pointing to scripture that says, we'll always do this or always do that, is a misreading of those kinds of scriptures. And I think this story is kind of a good illustration of a better way to think about it. And that is, okay, there are obligations and there are things that you should do just because it's helpful, right? So are Christians obligated to support their government in every way? No. And there's some times when you just have to stand up. If the government's doing something immoral, you have to stand up. You have to fight for people being treated fairly. You have to stand up for those who are vulnerable. I could go on and on. I'm hesitant to give specific examples because I don't want half of the country to tune out this idea just because of the example I give. But there are times when you have to stand up to your government. However, when the government is just being irritating, when it's not corruption, it's just not the best management, when it's actually not doing harm, but maybe it's building a road where you didn't want a road built, or it's allowing a density in your neighborhood that you preferred not to have, or something like that, then I think Christians who are unhappy with what the government's doing, but it's not immoral and it's not like, really hurting people, I think then we're called to be loyal opposition. And that might mean that we continue to pay our taxes. We continue to be, supportive. We continue to be conversation partners. We don't yell and scream and kick and try to take our toys and go home. What we do then is we be the best citizens we can be, advocating for better government, for better ways. And I think that's true in the church too. Like, if the church is gone off the rails, like, it's no longer about Jesus. Maybe there's a pastor who's promoting him or herself instead of Jesus. And the church is trying to do things that are hurting. If there's abuse in the church and those kinds of things, then by all means, we have to stand up, stop supporting, don't even go call them out publicly. But more often than not, the great majority of church disunity is about preferences. they sang a hymn instead of a contemporary song, or, the color of the carpet's wrong, or I wanted this event to happen and it didn't happen, or this, that, or the other. And I think part of the message that I take out of this passage is that's not reason to stop supporting. Like, at some point you may need, for your own spiritual well-being, to change churches. You can leave well, but what happens sometimes really dysfunctionally, and I'm like, New Life is fantastic about this. I've not seen this happen at New Life, but I have experience from previous churches where this kind of thing happens, and I hear it from colleagues all the time, where people won't leave, but they just oppose. So they sit in the back. Some of the wealthiest members fold their arms. They glare at the pastor throughout the service. They glare at the music leader. They refuse to tithe, or if they do tithe, they tithe into some special fund that can't be used. And that may be a reasonable thing to do if the church is doing something immoral, but it's not the right thing to do if the church is just not functioning the way you want it. So I feel like there is something in this passage about loyal opposition. I'm curious what you guys think. Maybe you think about this passage completely differently. Leave comments, tell me by direct messages, or feel free to come on the Zoom call at 7 p.m. And again, I'm going to stop right now and go put the ID and password in the description. God bless and have a great night.